Salute is a program for and about men and women who have served our country. Our program includes news about the laws that affect veterans, information on benefits and services, and news from veterans organizations. And now, our host, Bob Peters.
Hello, I'm Bob Peters, and welcome to Salute. My guests today are two gentlemen who served in the United States Coast Guard, father and son, Carl and Al Tuthill. Al is the father. Al, welcome, and Carl, welcome.
Thank you.
Al, tell us a little bit about yourself when you went in the Coast Guard.
Well,
Did you always want to go in the Coast Guard?
well, I used to get chased off the city pier in Connecticut from the Coast Guard during the war, first part of the war. So I got interested in it. Of course, I liked the yachts they were running around in. So I went down and checked it out and ended up joining up in June 25th, 1947.
1947, yeah, and you did. You had a long career.
I had a long career, very interesting career. 28 years, active, and 2 reserve.
So, of all the places you've been in the Coast Guard, what was your job and where were you stationed? Or
Well, of course, I went to boot camp in Mayport, Florida. And then I went to Baltimore on a ship, a weather ship, the Dexter. And we went on weather patrol in the North Atlantic. It was like 30 days out and 40 in, and sometimes it was 60 out and 40 in. But it was very interesting. We carried United States weathermen with us, and they put the balloons up. And then we'd send the weather report that they got out for the airplanes and ships and so forth. So it was very interesting.
Mm-hmm. How many different ships were you on?
Oh, let's see.
The
I was
Pinta?
on the Pinta, the Maria. Thanks. Well, let's see. Dexter was my first, and then I had the Acushnet out of Portland, Maine, and the Dexter was out of Boston. The Acushnet was on ice patrol, international ice patrol. That was very interesting. Mm-hmm. We'd go out in the winter and early spring, and we'd plot all the icebergs in the Atlantic. And of course, we'd send the positions in on them, so the shipping knew where they were and they could avoid them. And it was very good for the weather at times for the aircraft flying over also. Mm-hmm. Then on the different ships, I guess I was on about 6 different ships. And then I was in the Pacific on weather patrol, and then I went to a Loran station in the Pacific in the Caroline Islands, Saipan. And then I came back to the States. And
Did you get married when you were in the Coast Guard?
oh, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And you have one handsome son here. How many more?
Oh, I got another handsome son and 2 good-looking daughters.
Oh, okay. So, well, getting to your handsome son here, Carl, you had quite the, 20-some-odd years?
23 years.
23
Right.
years.
Mm-hmm.
And you went in what year?
I went in 1972, actually during the Vietnam War. And my first choice was actually to go to the Air Force, and I went down to the recruiting office and took their test and passed them, and they said, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to fly. And they said, well, you don't have any college. I said, my mother says I don't need any, I know it all. So since they wouldn't let me fly, I said, well, I'll go down to the Coast Guard recruiter. And I went down to the Coast Guard recruiter and took all the tests, and he says, okay, you qualify. He said, we'll see you in 2 years. And,
2 years?
And when you're 17 years old, 2 years is a long time. And I said, well, what's up? And he says, well, everybody wants to get in the Coast Guard to avoid going to Vietnam. And I said, well, I'll go to Vietnam. The Coast Guard's over there. And he says, well, there's a waiting list. So I went home that night and Dad comes home and he says, "Well, what'd you do today, son?" And I said, "Well, I went down to the Coast Guard recruiter." He says, "Did you see Chief Lee?" And I says, "I don't know who I saw. I saw a guy down there." "Well, what'd he tell you?" He says, "Told me to come back in 2 years." He said, "Did you tell him who you were?" And I said, "Well, of course, Pop. I filled out all them papers." And he says, "Well, wait home in the morning. I'll call you in the morning." So he calls me the next morning about 9 o'clock, and he said, "Go back down there." And I went back down, and there was the same guy I saw yesterday or the day before, and it was Chief Lee. And I walk in the door, and he says, "Why didn't you tell me who your father was?" "You didn't ask."
We were afraid you heard about him.
"Well, here, sign this, go down and get a physical. You're going in Friday."
Wow, that was quick.
I said, "Oh, okay." So, so that's how I ended up in the Coast Guard.
And what did you serve? What job was yours?
Well, actually, after going to boot camp and I was very fortunate. I qualified for any of the schools, and when I went to the counselor that decides where you're going to go, and he said, "Well, what do you want to be?" And I said, "Well, you know, I'm probably a good yeoman." And he says, "Oh, that's in Governor's Island." I said, "Oh, no. Don't want to go to Governor's Island. What do you got out in California?" And he says, "I got radioman school." I said, "Radioman? Well, I think that's what my father was." "Yeah, I'll take that." So off I went to radioman school, and luckily ran into a good friend of his that was the Master Chief in charge of the school out there, or either luckily or unluckily, because
I'm sure he left a reputation wherever he went.
Well, I didn't get treated like everybody else out there. I got the special treatment.
Oh, that's good. I guess.
The specially hard treatment.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So ended up graduating #1 in my class, and which was a surprise to me too. But then I went and served on ships. Of course, I didn't get to pick where I went, even though I graduated #1, because somebody else picked for me.
Really?
You
Yeah.
don't believe that.
It's a vicious
Don't believe
rumor.
that.
It's a vicious rumor.
So anyway, I had a great career in the Coast Guard. My only regret is that I did retire after 23 years, and because we both had gone as high as you can go in the enlisted ranks, and there was no more challenge for me. So I said, well, might as well. I went in at 17. I was 40. You know, it was time to do something different. So now that I've been out for a while and look back on it, I wish I'd have done that other 7 years so that I could be playing golf with Pop every day.
Yeah, that'd be nice. You had a couple of photos you wanted to show us, Al.
Yes, I did.
What do you got there, buddy?
Well, this was at my retirement ceremony in 1975, May the 1st.
Who was the gentleman giving you the certificate there?
That was Admiral Bullard.
Oh, yeah?
He was the 5th District Commander, Norfolk. Yeah.
He's probably glad to see you go.
I don't think so.
No?
We all got along pretty well.
Yeah, sure you did. What's the other photo you have there?
And the other one is on one of the ships I was stationed on in Savannah, on the Savannah River, the Coast Guard cutter Acushnet. No, I'm sorry. It was the Aurora, not the Acushnet. And the whole crew. I just took a picture of the whole crew there.
Now, in the Coast Guard, there's a lot of people don't know a lot about the Coast Guard. I think they just guard
Correct.
the coast. But
Yeah.
you guys, as you said, you were up there charting icebergs and
Right. Weather Patrol.
yeah, weather patrol. How far do they go, and what size ships do they have? I know you see the helicopter all the time on the news. They're coming in with the basket, getting somebody out of the water, but
Well, a lot of people think that the Coast Guard just sticks around the shore. That's a big fallacy. We're all over the place. In Europe, Pacific, We've had Lorraine stations in the Pacific.
Do you have your own stations? Like the Navy has a shipyard. Do you have Coast Guard have their own shipyards?
Yeah, the Curtis Bay, Maryland. That's the Coast Guard shipyard there.
Mm-hmm.
And
But when you're deployed overseas, where do you go? And if you got to go into shore?
well, whichever home port you're in. Like we have ships in Honolulu, all over
Yeah.
Southern California, New Orleans. We're all over. Seattle. He was up in Seattle on Weather Patrol.
Rains a
So-
lot up there, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah,
It does.
Yeah.
But
The ships are capable of going anywhere. Matter of fact, I just sold a car to a customer whose son is in the Coast Guard, and he is on the Coast Guard cutter Mohawk out of Key West, and they are leaving next week to go to Africa.
Oh wow.
And when she told me that, I thought that she was going off of Somalia coast because of all the pirates there. And,
Yeah, right.
that we'd go over and do a little training, but in fact, that particular ship is going on the west coast of Africa, all the way from Key West, and kind of a show the flag and train different nation Coast Guards of how we operate and everything that we do. So we can go anywhere. There are Coast Guard units in the Persian Gulf. Matter of fact, I was on an airplane on the first Gulf War while I was still active duty, getting ready to go over there to train some ships, and they canceled our orders at the last minute, so I didn't get to go. But so we're actually all over the place and have a real wide variety. The big oil spill in the Gulf, Coast Guard is the lead agency with that particular
they got their
mess.
hands cut,
They got their hands full on that one.
Yeah.
They were the lead agency for the Exxon Valdez up in Alaska. We do fishery interdiction. Matter of fact, I did a lot of fishery interdictions while I was on a ship out of Seattle. You see the deadliest catch on Discovery Channel all the time, and the fishermen that go up there and risk their lives catching the crab and all that. I was on a ship that rescued lots of those fishermen because it is very challenging waters up there, and there's a lot of things. But they do drug interdictions. Certainly, they're always patrolling for drugs. Search and rescue, that's what everybody knows the Coast Guard for. Pollution control, traffic control. Every major harbor has got a vessel traffic system that is run by the Coast Guard, like a air traffic controller runs airports. Major ports have vessel traffic systems that are run by the Coast Guard. So there's just a wide variety of things to do in the Coast Guard.
What would you say is like the largest ship they have?
The largest ship present, they were. I'm not active anymore, but I do get a retiree newsletter, and I believe that they're coming out with one that is bigger than the one that when I was in. The biggest ones right now that I know of are the Coast Guard cutter Polar Star and the Polar Sea, which are icebreakers. They're 410 feet long. They're probably 80 to 90 feet wide. They're capable of doing 8 knots through 22 feet of ice.
Wow.
something in it.
That's amazing.
It is truly amazing. They keep the pathways clear to the Arctic and the Antarctic, and they do a lot of scientific research. They're the platforms that all the scientists go up and, okay, we got global warming and we're measuring the ice and we're doing this and we're doing that. It's those two ships, and matter of fact, I believe I was reading where they've got another one coming out, because those ships are, the Coast Guard gets all the hand-me-downs, typically speaking. Ex-Navy ships that are no longer feasible, and they're
Do they
just
have to
starting
retrofit them, or
we retrofit them, and they are coming out with our own ships. Even while I was in, the 270-foot class came out, which was built specifically for the Coast Guard. Now that it's part of the Homeland Security their mission changes a little bit, so they're developing different ships to take care of that particular mission. You know, guarding the ports against terrorists and everything else. So, but they, you know, you have the big ships, and then, matter of fact, one of the ships that I was on, this was one of the biggest ships at the time. This was a 378-foot, what they call high endurance cutter. I was very fortunate. Although I was the radioman in charge on this vessel, the captain let me break in as an underway OD, which means that I was able to drive the ship. Not in the sense that I grab a hold of the steering wheel and the throttles and drive, but I stand on the bridge and give commands
Right
to the
turn,
helmsman
left
or
turn.
the, you know, right 15 degrees rudder, come around the course 260, and you know, starboard engine ahead 0.6, whatever the case happened to be. So I was very fortunate because I'm one of the few. Matter of fact, I've never run into another radioman that was a qualified underway OD on a 378, but not to say that there isn't, but I don't know of any other ones that are capable on there. I was also a primary law enforcement boarding officer. I spent a lot of time on ships down here in the Caribbean doing drug interdictions. This was one of the busts that I was involved in.
That's not coffee, right?
That is not coffee. There was probably if my memory serves me correct, 300 and something bales. They were probably 55 pounds apiece of high-grade marijuana that we busted on this particular trip. This ship that I was on was the Courageous, which was out of Port Canaveral. And for the 3 years that I was on there, 2 of the years we were a member of the Million Pound Club, which means
Really?
we busted over 1 million pounds of marijuana
Yeah.
per year.
That'd be pretty interesting. I imagine, maybe, do you like just randomly stop a ship, or do you have somebody that tells you that you got to check that ship, or
Well, you know,
how does that work?
it's-
And I'm sure they're pretty ingenious about how they hide some of this stuff, right?
Well, they are ingenious, but when you're carrying 300 and something
You got that much,
bales,
yeah, it's kind of obvious, yeah.
typically speaking, when we come up on them, and if you travel from South America to Florida, you've got to go through certain small, narrow passages. One, the east side of Cuba, the west side of Cuba. Then if you're adventurous, you go out a little bit farther because you always know that the Coast Guard's hanging right there, and they have blimps with radar on them, and anything comes up through those two
Well,
choke
blimps
points.
too, huh?
Oh, absolutely.
I didn't know that.
Unmanned, tethered
Yeah, okay.
blimps that go up from the ship.
Oh, okay.
That have a radar that can sweep that whole passageway, and then they can, oh, well, somebody's coming north. Let's go.
Why are they going
Let's-
way around?
Let's go check them out. And,
Yeah.
and then some of them try to get creative and let's say if they're coming around the east side of Cuba and they see us, they'll typically try to run into Bahamian waters, and well, unfortunately, they don't realize that we have a radio that we call the State Department, who calls the Bahamian government and says, we're chasing a boat. Do you want us to go in after them for you? And they always say, yes, please. And so we just continue until we do catch them, because we will catch them eventually. If we have to launch the helicopter, because they're maybe faster than our particular ship, we'll launch the helicopter, and they're not going to outrun that. And usually once they see that they're not going to outrun us, they usually just give right up. And when it's interesting, when you make a boarding on them, we lower the small boat and we go over there. And as you're circling, we do a security sweep around the boat. And as you're doing that, you're probably 25 yards away, and you just kind of go, yep.
So they sample their product to make sure.
No.
Oh, you don't
when
have
you
to?
have this much,
Yeah, you can tell.
even though it's wrapped in plastic, if you got a nose on you at all, you don't need a dog for this much. you can almost smell it from the ship if you're downwind of it.
Yeah.
But typically speaking, they carry it in vessels that don't have any fishing equipment on board anymore that are supposed to.
Yeah.
You look, you can see a false, we're in crystal clear water, so you can see a false water line. They try to get creative sometimes on if they're not carrying marijuana, if they're carrying cocaine, they used to try to attach it underneath the hull.
Yeah.
Well, when we make the circle around, we're always looking at the hull, and you got a black hull and you see this package. Well, what's that?
A piece of ice from an iceberg. It didn't melt.
Especially in the Caribbean.
Or they do get a little bit more creative, and they'll put it in a false fuel tank. But you know, we're trained to look for that kind of stuff, and if we have to bore a hole in it and send a scope down in there and go, "Ooh, what's that?" We do it because we know that they're doing it.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to catch them, really, and obviously we don't get them all because there's still a lot of drugs.
Oh yeah, sure is.
But we can't be out there 24/7. So you know, the Coast Guard's got a big mission. You know, how many resources have they diverted to that oil spill right now?
Yeah.
Last count I saw, it was like 80 vessels. You know, that's a lot of resources.
Yeah. You don't have any idea how big the Coast Guard is?
Certainly. The Coast Guard is probably about 38,000 active duty. There are probably close to 60,000 Coast Guard auxiliarists. Now, these are numbers from when I was still in.
Right. I mean, I'm sure it's probably gotten larger because, you know, the job has gotten larger. You've got these big oil spills. You've got those pirates out there in Somalia and all that stuff. So I'm sure the Coast Guard has increased in size.
One of the interesting things when I was in, we used to make reference to, was that the New York City Police Department had more people in it than the entire U.S. Coast Guard had in it.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, you know, that kind of gives you an idea of, you know, we're certainly the smallest service, and I'm sure we still are. I don't have the up-to-date stats right now, but that goes without saying. But we're the busiest.
Yeah.
Whether there's a war going on or not, we have a mission. And that's the thing I like the most about the Coast Guard. There's always a mission. Whether it's search and rescue or drug enforcement or vessel traffic or marine safety. Who do you think does all the inspections on all these cruise ships that are cruising out of Florida and everywhere else? You know, the Coast Guard makes sure that they're following all the regulations they need to be following, and we have air stations. You know, we obviously.
Yeah, I know you have planes too, and
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
One thing I'd like to bring up, a lot of people often say, what does the Coast Guard do? Well, the primary mission of the Coast Guard is to save lives and property at sea, along with the new things that come along, you know, like the drug and all, the oil spills. And they are very busy. And most of the time, they're underfunded. They don't get enough money to do all the work. And that's why our manpower is not as large as it should be.
Yeah.
And on a very interesting point, and a lot of people question me on this, but during World War II, the Coast Guard lost more people than any other service.
Relatively
Relative
speaking to their size.
Oh, yeah.
The size.
Oh, okay,
See what
yeah.
I'm saying?
Right, yeah, for the amount of people that are in these.
Yeah, because they brought all the, they brought the troops ashore on Tarara and all the other places.
Yeah.
So,
Al, you know when the Coast Guard came to being? No, you don't know. Your son does.
well,
Dad, do you know?
I know.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you answer that.
1914.
1914.
They were well, it started out as the life-saving service, and then it combined, and I might be a little off on my dates.
Is he
It was
right?
actually August 4th, 1790. It is the oldest continuous service that is never. The Navy came before the Coast Guard. However, they did away with the Navy for a short period of time.
Really?
So it wasn't. They didn't have a Navy. So then they reestablished the Navy. But the continuous service were the oldest service. And of course, some people could argue that point because we were first the U.S. Life-Saving Service,
Right.
and not the U.S. Coast Guard. And don't ask me what the date was that they shifted
Well,
over.
do you
to
remember? You were probably around then.
I've got a lot of memories, but
Don't go that
you know,
far back now.
my memories aren't that great anymore.
Is there any one particular time or one particular mission that either one of you did that you have a great memory for, or that you want to talk about?
Well, certainly search and rescue brings up the most fondest memories because I was on this ship. We had just gone into Dutch Harbor. We were coming out of Dutch Harbor, Alaska, refueling, and we got a distress call from one of the crab vessels. Reported that he was sinking. He was probably 45 miles away from our position. So we immediately, this ship has gas turbine engines that are capable of driving the ship over 30 knots. And we came up on gas turbines, and we're running, again, through very rough seas, probably in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 feet. And when you have a 400-foot ship that's almost coming out of the water in the bow and then crashing,
Oh yeah.
it's quite, and it was also blizzard conditions. So we're coming out, and there's quite a few of us on the bridge that were qualified underway OD. The captain was on the bridge. Everybody who was a qualified OD was on the bridge. So we're making our way. We're still probably 36 miles from the reported position, and we get a slight break in this blizzard because you could barely see the bow of the ship. But we come into a slight clearing, and the captain of all people happens to be his bridge seat was on the starboard side of the ship and right next to a big large window, and he was looking out the window and he said, "Anybody see that?" And everybody's like, "No sir, didn't see anything." And he says, "Well, who's the only guy on the ship that could possibly divert us from going to this position 36 miles away?" He says, "We need to go check that out." So we bring the ship about, we go over here, and in 25 to 30 foot seas, our captain saw 6 pumpkin heads from a survival suit at the top of a wave.
Wow.
The boat had already gone down. They had recorded their position wrong. We bring the ship around, and here's 6 people who had tied themselves together. They're in the water. As we make our approach, we see the vessel with the flipped over and just the bow sticking up. They immediately see us and untie each other, which was probably the worst thing
Yeah,
they
really.
could do.
Yeah. Now you got to
And,
pick up 6 different people.
And it was so, the waves were so big that we couldn't put a small boat in the water to pick them up. So we had to pick them up with the ship, which is kind of hard to do when you've got
When you're bouncing.
50, 60 knots of wind and 25 to 30 foot seas, and you got a cargo net hanging over the side that they've got to crawl 25 feet up to get on, and we rescued all 6 of those people. There were 7 on board, but they only had 6 survival suits, so we did not get the 7th. But you know, I always thought in my entire career that I've never seen a situation where how in the world could we have rescued those? They probably didn't have another 10 minutes left in them,
Yeah.
and they would have perished because of the hypothermia. But that was just an incredible rescue that'll always stick with me.
Well, I'm glad you shared these stories with us, and true tales, and I'm glad you really came because you're the first guys that got on here from the Coast Guard, and it's a terrific branch of the service, and they've done a lot. And unfortunately, I just got a signal that we're out of time.
Okay.
So I want to thank you for showing up.
Certainly
Earl.
welcome.
Al,
My pleasure.
buddy, I'll see you on the
Yeah.
golf course,
Yes,
hopefully.
sir.
And until next time, To all our veterans out there, active military and their families, we salute you. Be safe, and we'll see you soon.
Let us know what you want us to present on our program. Just email lakefronttv@earthlink.net and type salute in the subject line.